I feel like I need to defend my scene's honor here, because this is just turning into a bit of a dog battle.
Like in groups, always look.
I'm cutting you off here. I'm cutting you off. Cutting you off. He said G2's winning it. He said G2's winning it.
We need to wait till the next EU tournament, which could be in about 10 years now.
Take it with like a grain of salt.
No,
but
that's
that
no
being
fun.
said,
Take it super literally.
Spike defused.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Press 4 to Defuse, your weekly source of Valorant news and opinions. I'm one of your hosts, Starf Mike, joined by our fellow hosts. Here we got Sam and Ryan tuning in. How's everyone doing this week?
Doing good. Glad to be back after missing last week.
yeah, you were sorely missed. So happy to have you back here and somebody that can, help to cover up my lack of knowledge here and there. Make me look better.
See, you're wearing a very stylish coat this week, Sam.
I am. I'm so glad because I was gonna bring it up, but then I was hoping you would bring it up. Look at this bad boy. FTW Summer Showdown. Huge shout out to FTW for sending me this amazing swag. It's so great. And on the back, it's got like Nerd Street Gamers, T1, G Fuel, all the sponsors. It's really cool. It's warm and snuggly, and I'm so happy. Okay, I'm done.
Event merch is always fun. Free swag is the best swag, folks. And if anyone from any companies or brands are watching this right now, just know that the opinions on this podcast can be bought with nice merch.
Exactly.
True.
100%.
True.
Putting it out there into the universe, speak it into existence. We got a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, Sam and I covered it last week without you, Ryan, but we've got a big announcement that went live from Riot about an hour before the show went live. So we were grappling with that. We're going to wait a little bit to get into that. That's obviously the first strike announcement. We'll be talking about that soon. In the meantime, we're going to dive on into some roster changes that have been going on. It's been a bit of a shakeup. Last week was main roster mania, at least in North America, but it seems like we're having roster mania part 2 coming through. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up. Here's our first move. This is Dignitas, removing 2 players. Shanks was just on trial, but his brother Poised, they're literally brothers, has now been removed from the roster as well. Both Shanks and Poised out, leaving Dignitas with just 3 players. Quite down in the manpower department. Ryan, what do you make of this one?
I mean, it's a big loss to Dignitas in that sense, but I guess they'll be quite happy that Shanks was only a trial. So in that sense, it's quite a easy. We're just not bothering with them anymore without going into too much detail and contractually not getting into too much of a pickle there. Poised is understandable. We can kind of tell why these things are happening when it comes to potential things happening in the CSGO region. Nothing confirmed, but I think this is very much it feels like very much a canary in the coal mine, and for this very yellow team that seems to match the color, it's going to be a big loss for them, and there really isn't too many players that can kind of fill that void. If there is, pretty sure 100 Thieves are going to be after them. So big loss to them, and Dignitas as an organization are going to be very frustrated with how things ended up.
Sam, thoughts?
The thing that kind of really hurts for me, I say hurts, but like watching Dignitas versus TSM, which tournament was it? The one where like Dignitas slapped, where Dignitas slapped them out, and I watched Shanks just like tearing Wardell a new one on a few occasions, and it was so cool to see Wardell getting so heavily contested. And while don't get me wrong, if the rumors are to be believed, and if they are true, then I 100% understand Dignitas' stance on this. But as Ryan said, it's still a bit of a blow. They're going to need to find 2 players that can live up to the same skill level as Poised and Shanks, that can, maintain their streak. We've had a lot of power rankings coming out recently. I believe Spike GG put them in 7th. I think 6th or 7th,
somewhere around there.
And now they, 2 players down. They've only got 3 players left. Need to find a replacement. Not a ton of well-known talent still around, but there's always potential for those diamonds in the rough, and I think that might be what they're going for here. We'll have to wait and see what they do go with, though.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say it because you both bounced around it a little bit, and I just want to put it out there. For anyone wondering what we're talking about when we're talking about the rumors that are out there, we're talking about the match fixing rumors. The ESIC investigation should be concluding shortly. There are rumors that many players, many of whom made their way over to Valorant, were match fixing in their careers in Counter-Strike. And based on the timing of this announcement, when it follows up on the Envy announcement last week, it seems very likely that this team is concerned that either or both of these players might be implied or implicated in that. They played on a team together. If that's the case, the other player they played with who's prominent in the Valorant scene is Marved over on FaZe, which could get quite spicy. So look for that to perhaps be the next player who gets changed if this is confirmed. Obviously, we won't know until the investigation comes through. But that's certainly the rumor mill. And you could see the response from the Valorant Twitter community where these players got removed and you saw 1 million people tweeting about, oh, your actions are coming home to roost. Like, this is so it begins. We saw tweets from Counter-Strike. We saw Brax tweeting about how can you see my story and then match fix and think it's going to be okay. Yeah. Like, don't throw your career away. So everyone, it's an open secret. Everyone knows or at least believes that this is what's happening here with the Dignitas move, and frankly it is the only logical conclusion because both these players were playing well. Dignitas was playing well, they were heating up, they looked like they were going to be a contender, and then they're making this change, and it's like, what are you gonna do? Hit the abort button. We got to figure something out. We got to make some big changes here, and it's really unfortunate timing for them, but I am curious to see who they bring in because as you mentioned, T1 now has openings. Dignitas now has openings.
Envy?
Maybe? Envy filled them with Crashies.
Oh yeah, they did. Of course they did. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking of 100 Thieves as well. Like they're the ones that have the money and are going to throw it around at this point. But especially with things coming up in the future, which seems a while away, but in cases like this, they need to pull a roster together. And I don't want to be mean to the players that are yet to fill our slots. I feel it is going to be a bit of a step down in quality because these guys were exceptional in Valorant. But they made their bed a while ago. Now they have to sleep in it.
That they do. Well, that about sums up where we're at with Dignitas. Now we've got our next run through. This one's just a quick touch on for the NA scene. This is a team Noble. They've just sort of started to form. They're bringing in Tai, or Tai, or I mean the way he actually wants that pronounced is not great for broadcast, but we'll go ahead and say it. He likes it as Titty. But Tai I think has been the socially acceptable version of his name that we've settled on in the broadcast community. He's signed on for Noble. Noble is a team that hasn't really done much yet, but they're maybe a team to keep an eye on. Tai at one point was one of the more promising players on China Wen, who's one of the top ranked teams in the region, even if they don't have an org. They've been doing well without him. So maybe that adds some question marks. But personally, having watched him in a tournament, he's the best judge player I've ever seen. Terrifying judge. So curious to see how that one plays out. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on this.
I never thought I would hear anyone say the best judge player.
He played an entire finals game with just the judge. Just to prove he could.
That's impressive. I'll give him that.
He was trolling, but still, we'll give it
certainly a choice, but...
it is that. Either of you have any thoughts on him as a player?
I mean, he was great on China Wen. Like they looked really good when they had him. I think they won the Nerd Street Gamer tournament with him, and then unfortunately he was dropped at that point. Like you mentioned, China Wen seemed to be all right since then, but they did look better with him than without in some cases. But it really depends on the other 4 players of Noble, to be honest, too. At this point in time, can't recollect them off the top of my head, so that's pretty much a good sign of how noticeable this team is, I guess, with results and individual play, as mean as that sounds.
Yeah, it's they don't have a Liquipedia page yet, so that also gives you some good context for it. I believe I'm familiar with all of them, but you're right, I can't name them off the top of my head. I'd have to go look them up somewhere. So
yeah,
we'll go ahead and deal with them once they have a tournament placing for us to really talk about. In the meantime, this is a little bit more of a reputable org making a move, this time on the coaching end of things. It's Cloud9, bringing in 2 coaches, a head coach, Chu, who I think both of you are more familiar with, and then a strategic coach, James IRL, who's more up my alley. But why don't we walk through this? Sam, start us off. Talk to me about Chu.
Was the coach for Envy's Overwatch team in Tier 2, obviously not the Owl team, who I forget. Is it Toronto? Who is Envy's Owl team?
Dallas, anyway, I think, right?
Dallas.
Yeah, Dallas.
Yes, that's right. But he was the coach for the Tier 2 team. And it needs to be said, they went undefeated for quite some time. They were a phenomenal team, a real force to be reckoned with. And of course, I'm one that firmly believes that coaching plays a massive part in that. Yes, it's your players that, log into the game every time and play the game, but the guidance and the support from the coach definitely plays a part. So I think this is a pretty big pick for them. And I mean, he's been known to be an incredibly intelligent person. So I think having that transfer across, and something that I kind of always talk about is the Overwatch players coming over with ability usage and how that factors into how they play Valorant, on top of having the tactical ability and to formulate those strategic plays and so on. I think Chu will definitely give a really great insight for these players. So I think it's a massive pickup for C9 and one that I think they need.
Ryan, thoughts?
Same sort of thing. Like, I think Cloud9 really needed this. They've made a lot of huge moves this week in CSGO with Henry G coming in, and I think that's kind of moved over to Counter-Strike too, Valorant, sorry, where they need those foundations put in place. They're starting from the ground up there. They have a really good team. There's, of course, question marks over players like Shinobi, but I think considering he's the IGL, I think a coach and all of these extra members of staff is just going to benefit the team much more. That allows them to perform better in the server as opposed to just letting it be the tin show. So this is big, I think, for Cloud9. Exactly what they needed.
I think it's interesting. First of all, just to give a perspective from a different esport. I know we've all talked about it behind the scenes. There's been a lot of talk about it publicly as well. But the melding of ideas in Valorant is one of the more interesting things. And this Cloud9 roster has been pure Counter-Strike up until this point. So you've got another voice coming into the room, which could be quite interesting. And then to talk about James, who I'm more familiar with, coming from the CS background, he, I think, is potentially a big piece. He's sort of a quieter person, so he's not necessarily as well known, at least outside of Counter-Strike. But I do know that every player I've ever known who's played with him raves about working with him, raves about him entirely. I know the previous Cloud9 Counter-Strike roster, who he wasn't even directly coaching, still really valued his input. He'd give them notes on their practices and things that he'd observe in matches, and they really valued what he brought to the table. So he's a smart guy. He's a guy who's occasionally left coaching to go into, I think, high-end consulting work because he's a very smart guy in demand. And he does a lot in terms of helping a team prepare and helping them game plan and sort of counter strat and that kind of thing. So I think he could be a huge asset to this Cloud9 team as well. So this is also interesting because I think it's the first time we've seen an expansion of Valorant coaching rosters. We've started to see this in other esports where you're bringing in assistant coaches, strategic coaches, different mindsets coming in to have more voices in the room. But in Valorant, we're barely into having coaches. Many teams still don't, or they're bringing in their first coach and figuring that out. Now Cloud9 comes out with 2. Do we think having more voices in the room, having more brain power cumulative is really going to make a difference for the squad?
Think that, again, coming back to what I was saying about Overwatch having the ability side of it, and of course CS having the TAC FPS side of it, and I think it's really telling that James is coming in as the strategic coach. Like that says so much. So they're bringing in the CS voice for all of those strategical plays, having those kind of default plays it's set down and ready to go, and then you bring in Chu for like, how do you utilize your abilities to maximum efficiency? How do you complement the strategic plays with those abilities so that you can get maximum performance out of it? I think this is the greatest melting pot of minds. And as you said, it's the first one so far, so the best one so far, and I'm kind of hoping we'll see more of it, kind of Overwatch and CS coming together to create like really, really high-powered Valorant teams.
Ryan, get any thoughts? You want to hop on?
I don't, not necessarily, really. I think it's just kind of like we're now going into a stage where there's big balance patches coming out. There's new agents every 2 months. I think having somebody to do a bit of the brain power there is a huge help. You already sort of see some teams trying to experiment, namely Team Liquid, that went very much beyond the deep end. But that's the kind of things that teams should be doing. We also happened to TSM where they were like, what we're doing is working, so we're just going to chill. They can't keep up with anybody anymore. And that's because they don't really have those kind of resources, I suppose, to keep thinking where the game should be going as opposed to where it is. So, yeah, this is big, and I think more teams should follow suit. FPX have done it too with Fragon and Doom Bros. It's going to be the difference maker.
Well, for this next topic, This is perhaps the spiciest topic of the week. This meme may not make sense to most people, but we've had some more cheaters exposed in North America. Woo! Get rid of them. Run them out of town. Torches and pitchforks. So this meme was posted by Fox. Fox, if you're not familiar, was banned actually after competing in a Nerd Street tournament, I think about a month ago, where it was found that he was cheating. He was on a team with Rare at the time. Rare claimed to have no idea that he was cheating, was so disappointed, yada, yada, yada. Rare then comes back. I think he was playing with Ryut as well at the time, and they both got banned for cheating. Rare then comes back this month with a team, competes in a tournament, and he and Rose and Card, who are all on that team, get banned for cheating again. Cheaters never prosper, folks. He came out with a tweet, which, spoiler alert, this is classic cheater logic. This is the most classic cheater logic in existence. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. But you'll notice that cheaters in games always think that everybody else is cheating as well, and that's how they justify the fact that they're cheating. He accused a ton of different people about cheating. He confused people about match fixing. He said the whole scene is rotten, and that's why he felt he had to cheat. Yada, 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 yada. Blah, blah, blah. Just terrible things. There's no place for this. Get rid of him. He said, Ryut's still competing, pretending to be someone, so that's the guy who got banned alongside him cheating. Teammates were manual banned. Week's still playing. Another guy who got cheated for banding. Banned for cheating. Cheating for banded. Whatever. I know 20 plus boosters using cheats. Vanguard blows. He accuses some people of match fixing. I'm not going to name them because I don't think they're match fixing, and I think he's just being a salty little poo. Cheating. Vanguard was supposed to wage war on cheaters. It's running at a kernel level. It's so invasive on your computer. What's going on here, Riot? Why do we have cheating in competitive tournaments where it requires a manual ban to get rid of them? Clearly some issues here. Ryan, thoughts?
Cheaters never prosper, as you sort of mentioned. It's kind of like with everything going on at the moment, like yet again, you look over to Counter-Strike and you just see how deep that rabbit hole goes. It's such an awkward time, and I feel at this, we've gone over match fixing, the cheating. Honestly, what was said there was more of a copy pasta. I don't want to give it too much like attention when it said like, oh, Vanguard's trash and stuff. It is kind of more, Counter-Strike are now going back very long time, like 3 years plus, looking back at some of how the observing bug was manipulated in a way that they could see the game from they could pretty much call out where the enemy team are playing based on that bug to really sort of cut it short. They have to go back from now to about 2015 since this bug was in the game, right? That's a long time to go over. And this is the breeding grounds of Valorant esports. It's all online. It has to be because of COVID, right? So it concerns me that there's this kind of stuff going on. I'm quite glad that you have these almost like comical people bouncing in and out of the scene with very blatant cheats. But then you look at all the stuff with Poised and Shanks. There's it's such a deep rabbit hole. It goes beyond Valorant into Counter-Strike. And we already had this with Ardis, right, too, where cheats is a concerning factor. I think Riot are doing all of they can. But I'm still like, for me at this point, I remember watching Sliggy talking about it with the Valve bug in specific to Counter-Strike, and he was like, that's Valve's fault for letting it happen. They knew about it and they didn't do anything. To Sliggy's words, not mine, right? So it's such an awkward place for a lot of these players, but I think Valorant and Riot are doing the job right, and certainly going into some of the bigger tournaments, I think Ignition had no problems at all, other than Noel Pinky getting falsely accused for cheating at We Play. I think they've done a really good job of handling those kind of cheats, but there's a whole surface level worth of stuff that does not look good for the scene generally with some of these players, right? So it's a bit of a long-winded answer. It's intimidating, I suppose, that all of this stuff carries on, and them saying that there's more people cheating and match fixing and all of that. There are people that will be, but we won't know at this point. So I think Riot have a big problem to not only keep their eyes onto the future, but also very much go over now with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak.
What I'm really happy about, so all the Overwatch peeps are going to know a little bit more about this, but there is a lad whose name is It's Gamer Doc.
Oh, yeah.
And he started Overwatch PD back in the day, Overwatch Police Department. And that was for people to report cheaters. And he was trying to, he released a lot of stuff about cheats I think he released some like source code for cheats at some point, and he was like, "This is still a cheat that Blizzard hasn't detected yet. Please, retweet, spread awareness, blah blah blah." So he did a lot of work in the Overwatch scene trying to deter cheaters. And now as soon as Valorant came out, he started with that as well. He was doing the same kind of thing. He started Valorant Police Department or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly what the Twitter handle is, but he started basically the Valorant equivalent. And very recently, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was announced that he's actually joined the Vanguard department or whatever, and he's helping with all of that stuff. And in fact, who was it that tweeted out about this?
It was
Rare.
Rare.
He tweeted out, he was like, and this was before everything happened, and he was like, "I've contacted It's GamerDoc because the cheating, the accusations, it's all nonsense, and as soon as I'm cleared, then I'm just gonna meme on all of you." And then like a few hours later, he got banned.
Tweets that age like milk.
Yeah.
Oh, so I think that bringing GamerDoc on, somebody who, I gotta say, like, he got a lot of heat from the Overwatch scene, but from some of the stuff that I've seen, like on his Twitter and the Overwatch PD and so on, he's really, really clued up. He's really like plugged in when it comes to cheats. And I think that adding that on top of the Vanguard stuff, having that person that can be liaison and whatever, that's gonna do so much to help with the cheating problem. So I'm really glad they've given him this opportunity.
It's good to see. It's good to see. Hopefully we won't have too many more cheaters. Hopefully we'll get them on out of here because it's not good. It ruins the integrity of the scene, obviously. So clean it up, get them out, ban them for life. I don't know what you want to do, but certainly give them some long bans so they can go ahead and get out of here while Valorant Esports is developing. Now we're going to hop on over to the other side of the pond, your guys' region a little bit more. We've got some roster changes coming in, starting with the Nolpenki changes. They've lost 3 players. 3 players have left or parted ways, whatever it is. Loudly, Chowsder and Destrian are going to be exiting the roster. What do we make of this one? Sam, start us off.
Obviously, losing 3 players is kind of terrifying for like anyone who's a fan of the team. You take one look at this and you go, "Whoa, what has just happened?" But obviously, we don't have all the like cool background information and stuff. What I will say, first and foremost, Nolpenki, not one of those like top 5 teams. We were kind of talking before this episode started about how you can't really do an EU top 10 because everything is just so in flux at the moment. Top 5 is more or less cemented, and they kind of fluctuate amongst themselves, except for maybe G2. But top 10 would just be a nightmare to try and even contemplate. Nolpenki have been pretty consistent, especially kind of at the start of when Valorant released. In those first couple of tournaments, they did fairly well. And, a lot of the other teams have kind of pulled ahead a little bit, but they've remained fairly consistent. So they're still a name that anybody who's been following EU should know. Now, losing 3 players, yes, devastating. But it was, I believe, Rhyme from NIP that commented on the tweet and said, this team, or this new team, is really strong. Now, we don't know. That clearly indicates to me that the 3 new players are either set or, the cogs are in motion or whatever. But that says to me that the changes, while kind of depressing for the 3 players that have now gotten the boot, are potentially going to be good ones for Nolpenki. If a Ninjas in Pajamas player is saying this new team is strong, that kind of gives me hope for Nolpenki's future.
Okay. Ryan, any thoughts, or should we skip on to the next one?
Usually when it comes to teams like this, it's quite easy to go, those players weren't particularly strong. I think Show and Loudly did show up quite a lot in these tournaments, and they have won tournaments. They won the Trovo event. That was like 10 grand's worth of prize money. But this, to me, is looking like VAC wants to have this team be more of like a European powerhouse. They were all Lithuanian, so no doubt that was their language that they spoke in. So now I feel like they've pretty much pulled out all of the talent in Lithuania and realized that if they want to really progress to be a top 5 team in Europe, they might need to start pulling players from different regions. So I can understand why this was made. Generally, this decision was made. But I do feel bad for these 3 players as they did perform when necessary, alongside Boo as well, which I think is still with the team, right? So, like, that is, to me, the backbone of a really strong team, depending on what players they add in.
All right. Well, on to the next move in the region. This one we're just going to touch on briefly, I think, but we're going to pop it over. These are the Skade changes. We've got Manhattan coming in. We've got Frinnis coming in or will be replacing Frinnis. So, Manhattan, give me 30 seconds on him. Anyone want to take this
Overwatch?
mantle? I know nothing about him at all. No idea who
Yeah,
this is.
so off-tank player in Overwatch, Swedish player, did fairly well for himself. What I will say is he played on the Young and Beautiful roster
It's a good name.
for Valorant, and they did pretty well in the Odyssey qualifying number 2. They made it all the way to quarterfinals. Now, previously they'd been kind of getting knocked out of qualifiers fairly early, like round 1, round 2. They made some really cool swap ups. They had a pretty big Overwatch lineup: Krem, Sean P, Manhattan, a lot of those players. But now Manhattan making the swap over onto Skade. Manhattan also a Swedish player, so that kind of helps with the whole Swedish lineup. And I had an opportunity to actually see him play again. They haven't really had much airtime as a team, Young and Beautiful, but they did pretty well in the Allied esports qualifier. So hopefully this is the level up they were looking for. I don't know much about Frin either. Another player that I just didn't get to see too much of. So this could be, but I'm waiting to find out.
All right. That'll be our 30 seconds on that one. Now on to the most interesting change in the scene, I think. This is the NIP change. Safe coming in. So he is going to be joining the roster. This could be spicy as well. Obviously, coming over from another top team. He's joining the roster. Ryan, you want to give us the lowdown on this one?
Yeah, the main thing is that Safe was the Prodigy player, not from Prodigy Agency, but the stat player that really could be the best in the region with the right resources. He was on Bonk. He was exceptional. He pretty much played every agent under the sun. Decided to move on to pastures new and follow his coach, Emil, over to Ninjas in Pajamas. This is a player that is very much, I think, on, like, he's a young artist, honestly, that he could be the best in the world at all of the agents that he plays. That's how I see artists. Like, yeah, you can look at players like Tens and Wardell that played a Jet, but try and get them to move over to play Sova or Raze. Mixwell struggled with Raze before, right? Artist, though, put him on any agent, he does like a top tier job of whatever. That's Safe, effectively. The downside for Ninjas in Pajamas is they dropped Hip and Fear off, the two players that were part of the Hip team, alongside Kriya that joined Ninjas in Pajamas before. From the sounds of it, this was not a good look from Ninjas in Pajamas. The players were surprised at this. Not only that it became very sudden that they were dropped, but also from Fearoff's perspective in his Twitlonger, that there was never any complaints about his performance. Now, we picked it up. We spoke about this before, didn't we? Because Safe and Emil left Bonk, and I said, they'd fit really well onto Ninjas in Pajamas because Fearoff is a good player at playing Silver, but he's not like artist levels or he's not Shao levels, which they can need to be if Ninjas in Pajamas want to be the best team in the region, right? They need to have top tier talent in all of the roles. Fearoff would never have a bad game necessarily, but he'd never have a great game at the same time. That was kind of his problem. He was always sort of lukewarm on a really important role. Nobody told him that he was not performing to expectations, right? He thought he was doing fine, and instantly he's dropped. So there's a lot of problems with Ninjas in Pajamas, how they're handling this. But this is also the third team that they've put together in 5 months. Like, this team before the changes with Fearoff, Hip, and Kriya on Ninjas in Pajamas, they were together for 2 months. That's not an awful long time for a roster. So the fact that we're seeing Ninjas in Pajamas be this knee-jerky, this early into the scene, is very concerning because these players are kind of getting screwed over with how they're being handled.
Will say, however, obviously reading Fearoff's tweet longer, you kind of get this image of how Ninjas in Pajamas handled the one thing, but of course that's only one side of the story.
Yes.
We haven't heard Nip's side of the story. We don't know, and I don't even know if they will make any sort of a statement. Maybe they just just going to carry on with whatever it is that they're doing. So we don't know if that is 100% the case. That's not to say that Fearoff lied, but very often it's like you feel that something happened a certain way and you kind of have your own bias because it's how you feel about it. And sometimes it's not 100% accurate. You know what they say? There's 3 sides to every story. His side, her side, and the truth. So even if we get Ninjas in Pajamas side of the story, that might not necessarily be the whole truth. It would just be like some kind of amalgamation of the two. But if what he says is to be believed, then it is a bit of a yikes look. But they've just picked up a brand new coach. So I think that Emil probably has a direction in mind that he wants to take the team in. We, unfortunately, as bystanders, cannot know what that direction is. And we can only hope that it does work out for the best. That being said, Fearoff and Hip Hip had some really standout moments, so dropping him really surprised me. The
Yeah.
Fearoth one, when we saw Safe and Emil leave Bonk, and you kind of brought up the Nip thing, and I was like, all right, cool. Safe replacing Fearoth, I can kind of see that. But when they announced that it was both Fearoth and Hip, I was like, okay. And I'm wondering who's going to come in to replace him, because there is still a lot of pretty good talent in EU at the moment. Unsigned, not sure who they might want to bring in for that. But I think that, yeah, Hip performed quite well in a lot of instances. So,
Yeah.
I'm curious to see who.
I was just going to say, there is a rumor that it is Chihuahua that's training with them that was on
That,
Intra
yeah.
Peak. I agree. Like, Hip got hard done by it, especially for the fact that he had pivoted away from playing like Phoenix and stuff and the Reyna to then playing Killjoy. And he did a really good job at that. That's not an easy like move to make. That's effectively going from a DPS player to a main tank, right? Like if you're comparing it to Overwatch. So
Overwatch
he
things.
went through all
that.
Yeah. Effectively, he's changing from like one certain role to another, and that's very difficult to do in such a short space of time. He looked really good on an agent I think is going to be very meta going forward. We saw a lot of teams dropping the Cypher for the Killjoy. I feel like he in particular was screwed over a little bit here. The Fearoth, it makes sense. It's kind of like a business decision. Safe's on the market. He can be one of the best players in the world. Do you pick him up over a player that's done decently for you but doesn't show the same level of potential? That's a really difficult business decision, but Ninjas and Pajamas are a business at the end of the day. I would have liked to have seen Emil have more time with these players, though. I think that would have been a really big change for them to have a coach tell them what they're doing wrong and how they can be better. Because they didn't get that before, and that's the shitty part of it, to be honest.
From an outside perspective, I'd wager that by the time Emil was picked up, he knew he wanted to bring in Safe, and they knew they wanted to bring in Safe. It was just a matter of like giving the optics of giving them a little bit of time to adapt, type of situation. But it'll be curious to see who the fifth player is who rounds out that roster. Hopefully with a coach that got a bit more direction. Still, as we've talked about, this NIP team has been very underwhelming in tournament after tournament. They're really not a top contender, and considering the org, considering the money that they've got available, they want to be. They want to be right up in that fight for the top, and they just haven't been. So hopefully that changes. Hopefully this legendary organization that's maybe had its fair share of troubles in multiple esports can make a run of it, can make this a little bit more competitive. But we'll see. We'll see what that winds up being. There's one more team to talk about that's not really in the EU region. It's not really in the NA region. It's actually Turkish. So we'll talk about it. This team, they were previously playing as Looking for Org, have now been picked up by Oxygen Esports. That's Mavera, Turco, Toronto, Mitez, and Zistu. I don't really know anything about them. Anyone know something in brief?
They were a team that kicked up a fit. Yeah. I remember them like kicking up a fit because they weren't invited to. It would have been like the level Clash tournament, I think it was, because they had a really good rating on VLR.gg, but haven't really played in some of the other tournaments. I think the best showing was. It would have been the Ignition event that was like around the 32. I've forgotten which one it was called. G2 won it, which doesn't really narrow it down, to be honest. But they had a really good showing, and I think they beat Liquid in that event too. I think it was them. They got to like the quarterfinal semis around that time, and I think lost to Nip. So this is a team that, has the potential. And I think certainly when you're looking at the first strike stuff, which we're about to talk about, I think Oxygen would be really happy that they picked up such a strong Turkish lineup. Probably the best in the region now that we don't have CNED's team as round as much, to be honest. Like, he's a free agent, so there's not really another strong team in the region that's worth keeping an eye on to the same level as Oxygen is now. Let me find out what that tournament was. Sorry, I forgot about it.
Whatever. They're an interesting team. They've had some promising results, and we got to move on because we got to talk about First Strike, and we're already way over line. So we're gonna pull this up. This announcement came up literally right before the show, like within an hour of the show. So we've been scrambling to figure it out. First, they released a video, then they put an article out with some more details. This is the first direct Riot event in Valorant. They are going to be putting on a tournament series called Valorant First Strike. This is no longer just the Ignition series. They're no longer just giving money to other organizations. They're putting it together themselves. I'll just read the first blurb. Today, we are thrilled to announce the first major Valorant esports tournament, First Strike. This event will crown the first regional champions for the games, allowing players and teams to showcase their greatness through merit-based qualifiers that will culminate in multiple regional finals in December. So it's not an international event, which we were kind of hoping for off of the first announcement. Obviously, that's probably not really Riot's decision. That's just the circumstances of the COVID era. But they are going to be regional events, which they might be on land. We've started to see some lands creep back in there. It's possible. They are certainly going to be regional. We're going to see some top team competing, and presumably we're going to see some substantial prize pots, since there was already substantial money put towards the Ignition series. Now that this is supposed to be the next level up, we might see that increasing. This is spicy. This is huge. Let's start off the takes here. Sam, hit us with it.
So the main thing, and this is something that was kind of discussed amongst some of the coaches and the managers of various teams, and nail on the head. The most interesting thing to note is that CIS and more specifically Turkey have each been given their own regions. Like, Turkey is not part of MEA, the Middle East and Africa region, which is normally where you would kind of slot MEA in. Even some of the CIS regions would generally slot into the MEA area. So CIS, fair enough, own thing, but Turkey as a country gets their own region, and that's super exciting because we've seen a ton of phenomenal Turkish talent coming through recently, from beta through the Ignition series. I mean, looking for org, just being picked up by a North American organization. There is a lot of faith in the Turkish scene, and I think it's really exciting for them. It means that they're likely going to be able to play on slightly lower ping, so they have the opportunity to really pop off and really kind of test their metal. You know, in Overwatch, the really big scene that people tend to overlook is Saudi Arabia. Here in Valorant, I think it's going to be Turkey. I think they've got a lot to show, and they've proven it time and time again. So that's going to be super exciting. And apart from that, I think just seeing these regions duking it out, it's going to open up a lot of opportunity, first and foremost, for like scouting. If organizations really want to start importing players, you know, once the whole COVID thing settles down, or if orgs that have kind of been sitting on the sidelines. The big one being, I believe it was Envy, that came out with a statement saying they're not ready to invest in the scene yet. They're not ready to invest the amount of money that's needed to, you know, buy players and whatever. I think it was Envy. I could be
Envy
wrong.
has a team.
It was NRG. It was Andy Miller, wasn't it? Yeah.
Envy, NRG, COD.
Envy's like the number 4 team in the NA region right now, I think, based on Spike rankings.
So I think that those organizations that have been kind of sitting on the sideline waiting for an opportunity, this is going to be such a good moment for them. And of course, Ignition series, having all of those like weird and wonky and wonderful formats, some wonderful, some just wonky, that's going to give Riot so much insight. And I think that these tournaments are going to be absolutely phenomenal. Super excited.
I want to talk about one aspect of it, which is that it's all open qualifiers. There will be no invited teams. It's all regional open qualifiers. It is a complete meritocracy. Earn your place. Fight your way through. Everybody's on even footing. And this makes sense for the first official tournaments of the region. Ryan, you want to unpack that thought for us?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing... Is that right? It's just the thunders come down. It's the best of two, the best of two gods
the
of the sort of come in.
Excited about this.
Yeah, it's just best of twos. No, it just starts up the storm. The interesting thing is that the qualifiers are going to be done by Premier Esport organizers. So, you know, for NA, I'm predicting we could see Nerd Street Gamers running tournaments because they've done an exception. They deserve to. I think everybody would agree, obviously. I forget that we're on that channel. I didn't mean to sort of like stir up like.
No, do it.
If it's us,
pump up Daddy Nerd Street.
Cheers, Riot. It's in good hands. I can, because I'm on the channel, I can be like, no, I have no idea where it's happening. EU Blast, I think, made a good accreditation to them.
So good.
But also, like, ESL are running tournaments in, like, the SEA region now. They could be wanted to get in on it. But you're right. Like, you look at Fnatic. Fnatic are another team that's kind of like, we're going to wait till Q4 of 2020, at least, before we pick up a team. This might be something that goes, okay, now we're going to get involved. And there's plenty of talent still out there, certainly for the EU region. Russia's a bit more, like the CIS region's a bit more up in the air with some organizations involved, but not to the same extent. This is great. You know, like, there's going to be a lot of teams out there that just will not be noticed nor got an opportunity. Yassine can calm down. He will be invited to a tournament with Bonk. if they can get there much like everybody. So that's the exciting thing with the big finals happening in December. Those could potentially go on to do like a Worlds thing in 2021 if COVID stuff dies down. But that's the hope, right? That's the hope.
One day.
This is exactly what they needed. Like I knew that something was coming at this point, but this has exceeded all my expectations. Considering the world around us, this is the best outcome for everybody, and changes within the game to make watching the game a lot better.
I have a couple of questions. So, first of all, another really exciting thing, changes to the Observer client. Thank you, Riot. Please, please let them work. Every time we get an update to the Observer client, it feels like they fix one thing
Always
and
like
break two
that.
other things, and then
Yep.
some bug comes in that no one expected. So, look, now that they're putting on their own tournament, they're going to have a great incentive to make the Observer client pretty. I almost just want them to, like, tear it down and rebuild it from the ground up, because they freely admitted that this was a slapdash Observer client that they threw together to just kind of get one when they realized, oh, people actually want to watch these games. And it's sort of been like messed with since. Just tear it down, build it up with a very intentional eye towards making an esports observing client. Make it the best one you possibly can. And that, to me, will be the biggest thing they could do for starting to cement Valorant's place as a growing and strong esport. That, please, Riot, I beg of you, just do it right. Do the Observer client right. Make it look good.
The one thing I wanted to say is I remember when Blizzard, when the Overwatch League came out, they upgraded their spectating client because it was a similar story. It was just very bare bones, not a lot of info. It was a huge change and so needed for the game. So I'm glad that within like the first pretty much 6 months of the game being out, we're going to see those kind of changes. A lot of people wanted to see a map. I kind of agree, but I'll take this and I'll take the Observer changes and also resetting rounds if there's any tech issues too, which hopefully doesn't need to be used an awful lot.
It's online.
But
it will be.
Yeah, it's good to have it there just in case. I'm very thankful Riot has not let me down here.
Praise Rito. Big shout out to them. We've got one other fact about it. This is a conversation that I want to open up. Obviously, one of the things that's been speculated about with Valorant esports is that Riot is a very active participant in their other esport, League of Legends. Specifically, they control it completely and entirely. They put on the leagues, they put on the tournaments. You cannot have a League of Legends tournament without Riot approval. We've already seen it to a degree in Valorant, where you needed, if you were above a certain prize pool, you needed direct Riot approval to run it as an event, even if it wasn't part of the Ignition series. If Riot is now getting actively involved in tournaments, which they said they weren't going to do till 2021 previously. When they previously talked about, they said they weren't going to touch it till at least 2021. That's no longer the case. They're getting actively involved. Obviously, this esport has grown beyond what they thought. Is there still space, and is there going to be space for community events, or are we going to see Riot already take control of the scene? And what does that mean for third-party tournaments? Sam, open us up. I know it's a lot to unpack. I can go. If you guys want a minute, I'll give my thoughts.
I think it's difficult for everyone involved, and I think that seeing tournament organizers take control, well, not tournament organizers, but like devs take control of the tournament scene is a fairly common practice these days. We've seen it with EA and Apex Legends. We've seen it with Blizzard and Overwatch. It seems to be more what devs are leaning towards, and it's understandable. They want control of their scene. They want to know what's happening, what's being done in their name, quote unquote, and you know what sponsors are getting involved, what kind of look is it projecting to the rest of the world, and whatever. I get it. I understand it. I think that this has been a massive bone of contention. Again, you know, from my Overwatch background, it's been a huge bone of contention in the Overwatch scene. People really struggling to create those community events. But what I will say is that the community events that come through after jumping through all of the hoops, it's good. It to, you know, maintain a certain standard. And in that regard, I'm kind of for it. Yes, I think it makes things really difficult for people, but again, you have a good standard, and you know that like teams coming into this, there's been a lot of questions around tournaments recently, like, is this a real tournament, is it a scam, they're asking for entry fees, are we actually going to get our money? Like, there's so many scam artists out there. So I think in terms of just protecting the players, I'm kind of for it.
Interesting. Ryan, thoughts?
It's a tough one, really, because I do feel that with the Ignition events that we've seen, which weren't specifically just Riot orchestrated, it was with their blessing. I do think a lot of other events will never really know the details because these events never happened. I do wonder how many events were planning to do something related to Valorant, but couldn't because Riot wouldn't let them because there was an Ignition event happening that weekend, or they were just delayed and moved around to the point that events just didn't happen. I can name one Ignition event that never happened because I think Riot were very umming and ahhing about particular things because they didn't know what they were doing. Not in the sense of they were clueless, but more they weren't sure how they wanted to go about it. That's why we had like 2 weeks of very little other than the Blast event, because I think Riot wanted to kind of go, all right, we've got to September. What's working? What isn't? What do we do now? And I feel that this is a great move going into the end of this year to go, this is how the rest of 2020 is going to look in regards to the big events. 2021, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. It's a nice cutoff point because a lot of people are going, okay, Ignition's event ended. When are we getting our next event? But we've already seen an impact. Some of the smaller events, weekly tournaments have stopped because they didn't get Riot's blessings. They didn't fulfill the community guidelines. I would imagine that there'll still be problems there, as there always is. Of course, the small guy will always get stumped by these big conglomerate companies, right? It's in Riot's right to do whatever they want with Valorant, and I'm excited for First Strike. But let's be honest, it will screw over some teams, it'll screw over some organizations, it will screw over some tournament organizers. That's just the way that it is. So to sort of pave it as this is the best thing, this is like the paradise for esports and Valorant, it's not going to be quite that simple. So I am a bit apprehensive, I suppose, about it.
I think what I'd like to see them do is to do a similar thing to what they've done with the Ignition series, which is if you're below a certain prize pool, go for it. You know, just put a cutout of, say, if you're paying under this amount, organize your tournament, do your weeklies, do your monthly, whatever it is, so that players have a place to compete if they're not necessarily that serious, and it can help the grassroots of the scene continue to grow. But I agree that once you're above a certain prize pool, look, if Riot wants to have a hand in it, they're going to have a hand in it. If they're already taking direct action in terms of organizing tournaments, that could be super promising for the scene. I'm curious to see how these First Strike events actually wind up shaking out, especially since they are so regionalized, since we've got your Turkeys coming through, your CIS for, so coming from Counter-Strike, there's sort of 4 regions that are always in the regional tournaments. You've got NA, you've got EU, you've got CIS, and you've got Asia, Oceania. And then sometimes there's South America, but sometimes the infrastructure tends to be problematic for online tournaments.
Sure.
But it's curious to see it stratified more. And maybe we'll see new talent rise as a result of it. Because if you're then getting to the regional ones, if you're then placing top of the regional ones, obviously there's eyeballs on you. You're getting picked up by orgs. People are considering things. It does definitely present an opportunity. I'm also curious to see what these prize pools are going to be. Because $50,000 with an Ignition series, these could start to get monstrous. I'm wondering whether,
yeah,
6 figures,
I feel that.
Maybe higher. I don't know. I'm curious. It's starting to get spicy, especially when you get to that finals. Qualies may not have the numbers, but those finals might be pulling in some big bucks. Look, you buying all those knives, you're helping Rito raise those prize pools. Keep buying the crazy knives, I guess. I'm not going to. I'm broke, but you can make it happen, folks. We originally were talking about doing another segment at the end of the show when we didn't think we were going to have much content of a stump debate. But then Riot hit us with this bombshell, so I don't think we actually have time for it. I think
we'll do it next week. We'll do it next week.
I'm going to show it for next week. But this is a nice teaser for next week, folks. Stump debates. I'm going to come in with a topic. They're not going to know what the topic is. I'm going to let them know the topic, give them a minute to prepare their arguments, flip a coin. One of them's going to have to argue in favor. One of them's going to have to argue against, with no predetermined expectations or knowledge. It's going to be fun for me. It'll be fun for you. It's going to be terrible for the two of them, but very entertaining for us, hopefully. And I encourage the arguments to be as absurd as possible. So that's our sneak peek to next week. We've also got, we can also talk about the Liquid G2 show match. It's going to be spicy. G2 is going to stomp the crap out of them, but maybe Liquid will surprise us. I'm going to summarize it there because we're running out of time here. We'll talk about it next week once it's happened and once we know more about First Strike. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. This has been Press Forward to Defuse. We are live every week at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this Nerd Street Gamers channel. If you enjoyed it, please do follow the channel so you know when we're live. Follow Nerd Street Gamers on Twitter, as they'll tweet it out as well. Follow our faces at our @ down below said faces. We'll probably tweet out when it's live. And we'll see you next time. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.